In the 6th century AD, there was only one city that mattered: Constantinople, the seat of the Byzantine Empire, the heir to Rome, a metropolis of nearly 1,000,000 souls, glittering with gold and unrivaled in its military might and sophisticated administration. Its ruler, Emperor Justinian I, was a man consumed by a singular, colossal ambition: to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. He had generals conquering North Africa and Italy. He was building the greatest cathedral the world had ever seen, the Hagia Sophia. But as Justinian's dream reached its terrifying peak, an unseen, silent enemy was stirring. An enemy that cared nothing for his armies, his laws, or his walls. An enemy that would kill 50 million people, shatter the imperial treasury, and permanently cripple the Roman Empire, guaranteeing the end of antiquity and the birth of the Middle Ages. This is the catastrophic story of the Plague of Justinian, the greatest calamity of the ancient world. Before the plague, Justinian's reign felt destined for legend. From 527 AD, he governed an empire of boundless confidence. His legal reforms, the Corpus Juris Civilis, codified Roman law for 1,000 years. His general, the brilliant Belisarius, had successfully reconquered major portions of the Western Roman Empire, including North Africa and parts of Italy from the barbarians. The Mediterranean was once again becoming a Roman lake. Constantinople was the ultimate nexus of global trade. The wealthiest city on earth, it imported vast quantities of grain from the fertile Nile Valley in Egypt to feed its teeming population. It was this magnificent, interconnected circulatory system of trade, wealth, and movement that would become the plague's primary vector. Justinian's greatest strength, global reach, became his most fatal weakness. The year is 541 AD. The plague did not start in Constantinople. It began at the periphery, in the bustling port city of Pelusium, at the mouth of the Nile in Egypt. Pelusium was a transit point for immense quantities of grain being shipped up to Constantinople, and with that grain came the perfect biological cargo. We know today that the Plague of Justinian was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the same agent responsible for the Black Death 8 centuries later. This bacterium lives in the fleas, which in turn live on the black rat, Rattus rattus. These rats thrived in the holds of the grain ships. 1,000,000 mouths to feed in Constantinople meant thousands of ships moving vast amounts of grain, providing a perfect, insulated environment for the infected rats and their flea passengers to travel undetected. From Pelusium, the plague quickly followed the major shipping lanes. It moved west along the coast of North Africa, striking Gaza and then the major cities of the Mediterranean. With every port of call, the plague was reinforced until it inevitably set its sights on the crown jewel. In the spring of 542 AD, the plague arrived in Constantinople. At first, it was a trickle, a few isolated mysterious deaths. But within weeks, the trickle became a torrent, a biological explosion. Our primary, most harrowing account comes from the contemporary historian and observer, Procopius of Caesarea, whose writing is the single most important window into this catastrophe. Procopius described the sudden, random nature of the attacks. It struck one kind of people and not another, often sparing those who tended the sick, only to claim them later without contact. The panic was immediate and absolute. The symptoms, according to Procopius, were unmistakable. It began with a fever, sometimes mild, sometimes intense, lasting a day or two. The victim would then suffer from intense mental disturbance, delirium, and hallucinations. Then came the definitive, grotesque sign, the appearance of the buboes. Massive, agonizing swellings in the groin, armpits, or neck, sometimes turning black and necrotic. If the bubo swelled and burst, the patient had a slight chance of survival. If it remained hard and dry, death was certain. The speed of death was often staggering. Many died within 2 to 3 days. Procopius reported that death sometimes came so swiftly that people were found suddenly lifeless in the streets, at their jobs, or mid-conversation. The true genius of the Roman Empire was its administration and infrastructure. But the plague systematically attacked the very systems that sustained the city. the death toll quickly spiraled beyond control, reaching figures that seem impossible to our modern minds. At its height, in the summer of 542, Procopius tells us that the death toll in Constantinople was reaching 10,000 people per day. Think about that figure. 10,000 funerals every single day for 4 months. The city broke down. First, the burial system collapsed. Bodies piled up in the streets, in houses, and in boats left floating in the harbor. Justinian eventually ordered the corpses to be hauled to the massive towers in the Theodosian walls, where the tops were removed and the dead were simply thrown inside until the towers were packed high with rotting flesh. The smell became unbearable, sickening those who had survived the infection. Second, the grain supply vanished. Sailors, dock workers, carters, and laborers, the very backbone of the imperial supply chain, were the first to die, as they were in constant contact with the infected rat population. The daily distribution of bread ceased. Starvation began to claim those whom the buboes had spared. Third, the government failed. Civil servants, tax collectors, and administrators were dying en masse. The state machinery, built over centuries, ground to a halt. Taxes went uncollected, laws went unenforced, and the elaborate military payment system fell into chaos. While his empire burned, the plague even reached the imperial palace. Emperor Justinian himself contracted the disease. For the empire, this was the ultimate crisis. An emperor dead from a plague would have signaled total failure, perhaps divine condemnation. The plague tested the very core of imperial authority. However, Justinian survived. He was severely ill, suffering intensely, possibly even lapsing into a coma, but he eventually recovered. Yet the man who emerged was not the same. The boundless energy and ferocious ambition seemed to have been tempered by his brush with death. While he was incapacitated, it was his legendary wife, Empress Theodora, who stepped into the vacuum of power. She maintained order, ensured the distribution of dwindling resources, and prevented the complete disintegration of the administration. Her decisive actions saved the empire from immediate political collapse, but nothing could save it from the long-term demographic blow. 1130 to 1400. AD 366, the long shadow. 200 years of death. Unlike the English sweat, which vanished after 66 years, the plague of Justinian did not disappear. It became endemic. The initial wave of 541 to 542 was just the first and most severe blow. Over the next 2 centuries, the plague would return to the Byzantine Empire and the Mediterranean world in waves every 10 to 15 years until its final mysterious disappearance in the mid-8th century. The fifth wave lasted from 541 to 542, and it was the catastrophic initial outbreak. Wave 2 strikes again on 558, focusing on major urban centers. Wave 3 continues to depress the population base for an entire year, lasting from 573 and 574 and so on, through the 7th and 8th centuries. This meant that for over 200 years, no generation was ever fully safe. Cities could not fully recover their populations before the next wave arrived. The cumulative effect was devastating. Demographers estimate that across the Byzantine and Persian empires and the surrounding areas, the plague claimed between 25 and 50 million lives in total, a figure that, by some estimates, represented a quarter of the world's population at the time. The plague of Justinian didn't just kill people, it killed the dream of Roman restoration. First, the military collapse. Justinian's armies, the greatest expense of his empire, were decimated. Soldiers died, and the state lacked the tax base to pay the survivors or recruit replacements. The campaigns in Italy and North Africa stalled, bleeding the empire dry without the necessary demographic and economic strength to hold on to the vast new territories. Second, the economic ruin. The death of the peasant class and the agricultural workforce led to a collapse in food production and, crucially, a collapse in tax revenue. Lands lay fallow, inflation soared, the state had to drastically reduce its ambitions, and shrink its territory simply to survive. Third, the rise of Islam. The most profound unintended consequence was the demographic vacuum the plague left in the Byzantine Empire's primary enemy, the Sasanian Persian Empire, and the surrounding Levant. When the Arab armies began their conquests in the 7th century, they faced two great powers, Byzantium and Persia, both of whom had been utterly exhausted and depopulated by 2 centuries of plague recurrences. The success and speed of the early Islamic conquests were, arguably, only made possible by the devastating demographic hammer blow delivered 100 years earlier by Yersinia pestis. The Plague of Justinian drew a hard, permanent line in the sand of history, marking the true end of the ancient world. The mighty Roman project was over for centuries. Historians speculated on the identity of the Justinian killer. Could it have been typhus, smallpox, or a hemorrhagic fever? Modern science has finally provided the definitive, chilling answer. In 2013 and 2014, scientists successfully extracted and sequenced the DNA of the pathogen from the teeth of 6th century burial victims in Bavaria, Germany. The finding was conclusive. The killer was indeed Yersinia pestis. This DNA evidence proved two things: the Plague of Justinian, the Black Death of the 14th century, and the third pandemic of the 19th century are all variations of the same disease, making them part of the 3 great bubonic plague pandemics in history. The 6th century strain was a distinct early branch of the Y. pestis family tree. This makes the Plague of Justinian the original bubonic pandemic, the first wave of the disease that would return again and again to terrorize mankind. It was the moment that the bacterium successfully jumped from the rodent population into the human ecosystem on a global scale. The Plague of Justinian is a crucial, yet often overlooked, pivot point in history. It taught the world that wealth and power are no defense against microscopic terror. It proved that a single biological event could undo the geopolitical ambitions of a superpower, emptying its coffers and shrinking its borders. The collapse of the Roman dream was not a consequence of a single lost battle or a failing emperor. It was the result of the relentless, silent work of a flea, a rat, and a tiny bacterium. The ghost of 50 million lost souls still lingers in the empty demographic spaces of the 7th century, a chilling testament to the deadliest empire killer of the ancient world. This story is truly terrifying. Do you think Justinian could have saved the empire if the plague had been delayed by just 50 years? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to dive deeper into the hidden disasters that shaped history, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Thank you for watching.